Dr. Kaul, your story and that of the events of your life has been widely told at different times by different people, including yourself, and in markedly different ways, all of which I am sure you would admit has painted a complex and at times quite contradictory picture of who you really are. Could you, for the sake of the audience, and particularly for those who have never heard of you, just give us the brief elevator-esque version of your life story that brings us to the principal point of our conversation?
Yes, I'll try. So let me just, I suppose, go back and start at the beginning, which is where I was born. I was born in 1964 in India, in a city called Hyderabad, which is in the south of India. And when I was 2, my mother's family left India and they moved to England because she and her family were Anglo-Indians. So they moved to the UK, and I moved there with my mother, my brother and 2 sisters. And my father remained in India. He was in the Air Force. He was a squadron leader in the Indian Air Force. So we moved to the UK, and we lived in a place called Dartford, which is just outside of London. It's south of London. And we lived there with my mother's parents. And we lived there, I lived there from the age of 2 till the age of 5. And when I was 5, my father, who had been living in India and flying in the Air Force, he obtained a job in South Yemen, in the capital of South Yemen, Aden. So I moved there with my mother, my younger sister, and my father. And my elder brother and elder sister remained in England with my grandparents. And so I lived in Yemen from the age of 5 to the age of 9. And then when I was 9, we returned to England. I continued my schooling in England. And we lived, again, just outside of London. And so from the age of 9 up until 14, I lived with my mother and my father intermittently and my siblings. When I was 14, my mother died, and she died of cancer. She was 43. And at that point in time, my family, my siblings became separated. My brother and sister moved in with relatives. So I lived in this, it's called a council house, actually. It's the equivalent in England of a housing project. So I lived in this council house from the age of 14 to 16 with my father. And then when I was 16, my father died. And I remained in this place up until the age of 18. But, also in this time I was at a school in England. It was a school run by Jesuit priests. It was a grammar school. So I was there from the age of 11 to 18. When I was 18, I began medical school at London University. I was at the Royal Free Hospital School of Medicine. And I graduated in 1988. I was 23 at the time. I did my internships in England, 6 months in medicine and 6 months in surgery. And then in September 1989, I came to the States. I had met an American girl in London, and I moved here, in my relationship with her. So I moved to New York, and from 1989 to 1995, I underwent my postgraduate residency training. And initially, I began in general surgery, and then I moved into anesthesiology, and I graduated from the Montefiore medical program, which was in the Bronx. And at that time, prior to that time, I had been in the States on what was called a J1 visa. And one of the conditions of that visa was that the holder had to return to their country of origin for a period of 2 years before they could come back on a permanent resident visa. So that's what I did. I went back to England, and I did a fellowship, an extra year's training in the field of interventional pain. So that was an emerging field at that time. So I did a further year's training, and then I decided to remain in England for a few more years, which I did. And then I came back to the United States in 2001, September 2001. And from September 2001 to April 2012, I built a practice in the state of New Jersey in the field of minimally invasive spine surgery. And it was, an extremely successful practice. And in this period of time, I invented a particular procedure that revolutionized the field of spine. And then in 2012, this is a very key point on the journey. These legal proceedings began with the medical board in New Jersey. And, I'll go into the detail further on in this interview. But in essence, my license was suspended. Not in essence, it was suspended in 2012, and then ultimately revoked in March 2014. And it was at that point that I, made the decision to teach myself the law, which I did over the next year, year and a half. And then I began my journey into the world of law and legal litigation. And so from 2016 up until today, we're sitting here, it's August 2023, I immersed myself in the world of law and in filing cases in the American federal court system. It's called the United States District Court, against the people, one of them being the man who was the governor of New Jersey at that time, Christopher Christie, filing lawsuits against those people that I believed at that time and knew to a certain extent had been involved in the conspiracy that had led to the revocation of my license. And so just to kind of bring things up to this point, I am now, at this time, involved in a case that I've been prosecuting in the federal court. And it's, I could say, quite comfortably closer to me winning than at any other point in the last 7, 8 years. Yeah.
I would like now to get to the main point of this interview, and it pertains to a series of events in which you and the ex-New Jersey governor and 2024 presidential candidate, Chris Christie, were, and I think still are, the central characters. Could you tell us about these events?
Yes, so, these were the events that I just referenced, and, and I suppose, going into more detail about them requires to kind of go back a little bit in time to really 2005. And it pertains to, what I referenced earlier in terms of me inventing a particular procedure. So, as I said before, I trained in general surgery, anesthesiology, and then interventional pain. And in the late 1990s, this technology had started emerging in the world of medicine, which is this minimally invasive technology whereby procedures on the spine could be carried out through what we call endoscopes. And so, people will understand endoscopes or arthroscopes that are used in general orthopedic surgery, where you put a particular device into a knee or shoulder, and you can conduct surgery through this particular device. So the same technology started being developed in the world of spine. And so people, prior to this, who had sustained injuries to their spine, to their discs, if they needed to have it fixed, they needed to have a very aggressive incision in the middle of the back, and the surgery would involve the removal of muscle and tissue and ligaments and bone. And so for the surgeon to get to the disc, there was a very aggressive approach. And that was associated with a lot of complications afterwards. people would have a high incidence of infection. They would have associated injury to nerve roots. And then there would be a lot of scar tissue that would develop in the back, and that would affect mobility. So the outcomes were not good. So when this technology was developed, I realized that people could have their intervertebral discs fixed through these tiny little incisions, and so I started to travel the world and train with surgeons around the world who were recognized as experts in the field. And in conjunction with my traveling around the world, I started to build my practice in New Jersey. And in 2004, I was at a spine meeting in Chicago that was conducted by what's called the North American Spine Society. It's the biggest spine society in the world. And at this meeting, there was a company there called Spinology. They're based in Minnesota. And they had a device. It's technically referred to as a Dacron mesh cage, but it's like a collapsible device. And I saw this device, and I realized that this device could be used to actually conduct spinal fusions, to actually go in and fix the back, as opposed to cutting the back open. And I conducted cadaver studies. I started working with the company to see if this was something that was technically feasible and could be done. And we established that it could. And so I think it was January 2005. There was a patient who was referred to me. He was a construction foreman, and he had sustained an injury to one of his discs on a work site. So he came in to see me, and he was restricted by the time that he could take out from work. He couldn't take out more than 2 to 4 weeks. And he had been to see, I think, 3 or 4 neurosurgeons in New Jersey and one in New York, who had all said that for them to fix his back, would require one of these very aggressive operations, that he would be out of commission for 6 to 9 months. So he wasn't interested in that, and he came in to see me, and I explained to him the procedure that I had invented, and that could fix his back on a same-day basis, and he agreed to move forward with that procedure, and I carried it out. I think it was either the last week or the first week of March 2005, and it was conducted in a surgical center, an outpatient surgical center that was and still is in Saddlebrook in New Jersey. And on that day that I performed it, the company, Spinology, had invited a group of other surgeons to come and watch the procedure. And, at the end of that day, the guy who was the surgical rep, or the regional rep for the Northeast, said to me, he said, I don't think you understand what you've done here in terms of, changing this field. And I really didn't at that time. But anyway, word got out about the work that I was doing. I started giving talks around the country. A number of the trade publications in spine started running stories on my work, and started covering the stories of some of the patients who had come in. So my practice grew exponentially. I became extremely successful in a very short space of time. And, with that success, unbeknownst to me at that time, there was a lot of, what I suppose people would call professional jealousy. And it was coming from principally the neurosurgeons, because it had been the neurosurgeons who had been doing all of these spinal procedures. So they didn't, I think, take too kindly to the fact that somebody who wasn't a neurosurgeon was now doing their work, and that it was being done in a surgical center and not a hospital. So I continued building my practice, and whilst I was doing that, they were busy conspiring against me. And And when I think back over that time, the guy who was the rep for the company, every time we would do cases, he would attend and he would mention things to me about what various neurosurgeons around the country were saying about me. Because he started traveling all up and down the East Coast, and he was up in Boston at the Mass General a lot, and down in the Carolinas. So, I didn't pay any attention to these comments. And, come 2010, I received a notice from the New Jersey Medical Board saying that they wanted to conduct a hearing with me into my practice. So this hearing took place in February the 3rd, 2010. And it was with what's called a preliminary evaluation committee of the medical board. So there were 3 doctors. And I attended this hearing with my lawyer. And at this hearing, there was a deputy attorney general from the state of New Jersey. And it lasted about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and they were asking questions about the work that I'd been doing and what I was doing, and it all seemed a bit bizarre to me that they were inquiring into my practice when they knew about my practice because they had given me the authorization and the license to conduct the practice. So it just seemed bizarre. And I remember leaving that meeting, and my lawyer had no idea what it was all about, and I didn't. And I just got back to work. And I was opening up a new surgical center, which I opened up in March 2011 in Pompton Lakes. And my practice had grown in a very, very massive way. I had opened up many other offices across New Jersey. I was teaching and training other doctors to do the procedure that I had invented. Physicians were flying in from across the country to watch me and to be trained by me. And, and we were about to open up a second surgical center, also in Pompton Lakes. It was, I had obtained one of the last licenses for surgical centers in New Jersey. And so we were going to open up this 36,000 square foot facility, which was, we were planning to have 4 operating rooms there. And, which would have accommodated the enormous volume of my practice at that point in time. So, in this project, I had architects and engineers and lawyers and a whole group of people. So April the 2nd, 2012, I'm in a meeting with this team of people, and my assistant came in and said that my lawyer was on the phone and that he needed to speak to me urgently. So I took the call, and he said to me he had just received a phone call from the Attorney General and that the medical board wanted to revoke my license. And he had no idea as to why they wanted to revoke my license, but that he had been told he would receive a copy of the complaint later that day. So he did receive a copy of the complaint, and so did I. I was served with those papers later that day. And when I read the complaint, what they were saying was that because I was not a neurosurgeon, I was not qualified to perform the procedure that I had invented, and that because I had been performing these procedures without their permission, which was incorrect, that I was a threat to the public and that my license had to be revoked. So between April the 2nd, 2012 and March 2014, there was an immense amount of litigation where the state and the medical board were coming after me. They had the insurance companies coming after me, and they had co-opted a number of my patients upon whom I had operated, who had done well, to file lawsuits against me. So it was it was a conspiracy in its purest sense. I just had no idea of the extent. And when this all began, there were patients of mine who, had been involved or were involved in the political process in New Jersey. And a number of these patients came in and started telling me what they had heard and what they thought was going on. And it, Christie's name kept coming up in these conversations. And, over this 2-year period from 2012 to 2014, I gathered, I suppose, enough information to be able to sort of lay out an initial picture of what had happened. And after my license was revoked, and, of course, there was massive publicity around it. I mean, every month almost, there was a story in the Bergen Record, the Star Ledger. There were stories on the news channel here, NJ12. They were running stories in the media outlets in New York. So it was non-stop media coverage in conjunction with all this legal stuff. So my license was revoked March 2014. And, I was in a position at that point in time where I had lost everything because all of my corporations had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, or I was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I lost my house, I lost my business, my career, everything. So I was in this place in 2014 where I was essentially in a state of poverty, essentially homeless, but not quite. And I had to decide what I was going to do. If I was going to leave America, because I had people in other parts of the world who heard about the events because they were publicized everywhere, calling me up and offering me jobs and, inviting me to go and join them. And I had to really think about what to do if I was going to leave and just let their story become my story, or if I was going to stay and fight. And, I spent about a year contemplating this, and eventually, in 2015, I made the decision that I had to stay and fight, and it was principally for my children. I have 2 children who were younger then, and I realized that if I left, that legacy, which would be the one that they had crafted, would forever haunt my children. And I realized that I had to stay and fight, and they were my motivation. It was my son and my daughter. And so having made that decision for those reasons, and also the reason of truth and justice, I then had to work out how I was going to fight. And I realized that I had to teach myself the law. So from August, September 2015, up until February 2015, I taught myself enough law to be able to bring a lawsuit in the federal court. And initially it was filed in the Southern District of New York, which is the federal court in Manhattan. And it was against Christie, and it was against these doctors and these hospitals. And so from that point, February 2016, up until today, I was involved in this litigation. And over these years, I became increasingly more effective, as a litigator. And, now have this case that's pending in the Southern District of Florida, in Miami. And to go to a point that you raised earlier about how is it that, the case is down there, it's to do with the way that the medical licensing system is set up in America, and to do with a number of technicalities in the body of law pertaining to what's called racketeering.
How did you get interested in anesthesiology, and in particular doing spinal surgery?
My interest in anesthesiology wasn't so much an interest directly in anesthesiology, but more an interest in the field of interventional pain. Because to get into interventional pain, you have to have done a residency in anesthesiology. And my interest in pain really peaked when I was going through my general surgery internship, and one night when I was called to the ER, there was a guy who came in with severe dental pain, and I injected local anaesthetic into his gums, and there was the change from this anguished state to, you know, a human that had no pain had this effect on me. So that was what pulled me towards these specific treatments of pain. And so then I realized that I would have to go and do a residency in anesthesiology, which I did. And then after that, I did the fellowship in interventional pain. But then when I got into interventional pain, and in that speciality, a large part of what the doctors do is they use this, it's an X-ray machine, it's called a C-arm. And they use the C-arm to inject therapeutic solutions into the spine. But you do it under X-ray guidance. And so in that field, I was placing probes and needles into the spine, and I was addressing people's spinal pain. And I realized that in treating their pain, that the period of relief was temporary. So they would come back after 6 months, 9 months, and you didn't really fix the problem, which would be, a herniated disc or, an arthritic joint in the back. And so minimally invasive spine was the speciality that actually fixed the problem in the back. And that's why I chose that.
You mentioned before that the rep from the company was telling you things that neurosurgeons were saying. What kind of things were they saying?
Yeah, the rep who I worked with regularly, would come to the surgical centre where I worked, and he would, in between cases, we'd stand outside having a cup of coffee and we'd talk, and he would start telling me about conversations that he'd had with neurosurgeons and orthopedic spine surgeons around the country. And, they were saying that I shouldn't be doing these procedures because I wasn't a neurosurgeon, and that, and that they were looking to see what they could do to actually stop me. So he was being quite explicit, and they were as well. And then, then there were certain comments that were, quite defamatory and derogatory. People have asked me the question as to why the neurosurgeons would have done what they did in conspiring against me. And, the surmisation that I arrived at was that they saw me as a threat to their business. And I suppose in its simplest terms, they believed that my success would lead to their failure economically. And so they said, how do we stop this guy? Because if we don't stop him, we're going to be out of business. That was their calculation. It was a false calculation, but that was their calculation. And so when they first started conspiring against me, they didn't engage in outright felonious conduct. The way they did it was they would start telling patients not to come and see me because I wasn't a neurosurgeon. They would tell hospitals not to give me admitting privileges because I wasn't a neurosurgeon. They would tell insurance companies with whom they worked and provided expert opinions not to pay me because I wasn't a neurosurgeon. But none of those tactics worked. And my success just continued. And so they realized that they had to, accelerate their efforts. And that's when they went to Christie. And in 2007, 2008, he was still on, this, his political career needed money. And so the neurosurgeons, who were very wealthy, they went to him and they gave him vast sums of money. And they entered into these quid pro quo schemes where they said to him, we're going to give you all these millions of dollars, but we want you to use your power to order the medical board to take away this guy's license, because we need him out of business. Because if we don't take him out of business, we're going to suffer. And so he took the money because he needed it for his political campaigns, and he ordered the medical board and his attorney general to manufacture this case, to revoke my license. And so the neurosurgeons, once my license was revoked, they believed that they'd achieved their particular goal, that their businesses would be secure, and that that would be the end of it for them. And because of the events that I've discussed earlier, that wasn't. So there's one particular neurosurgeon who was a very senior individual. He now he's found himself now in the middle of a massive racketeering lawsuit, and the outcome for him is not going to be good.
As a consequence of what you described previously, you filed a lawsuit against Mr. Christie and the officer who carried out the initial, but as you state, illegal arrest. In this lawsuit, a copy of which I have, you make a series of claims about some very serious violations of your civil rights. So my questions to you are, did you have a lawyer involved in the drafting of this lawsuit, and of what crimes or offenses are you accusing the defendants?
Yeah, so this part of the story that's within your question that occurred within the last couple of years pertains to the extent to which the defendants went over the years from 2016 to 2023 to stop me. And as I mentioned before, I began this litigation in 2023, and when I filed the cases, in the beginning I would be prosecuting them, and these defendants would retain lawyers, and we'd go through this process. But because I had entered a state of poverty, I was able to obtain what's called informa paupera status in the federal court, meaning that I didn't have to pay any of the court fees. So all I needed to do was the researching and the writing of the cases. And so they couldn't stop me bringing these cases. They couldn't stop me in the courts. And so what happened it was May the 27th, 2021. I had filed a case in Boston prior to that in which Christie was a defendant. And May the 26th, 2021, he was served with a copy of the summons and complaint. And on May the 27th, I was kidnapped by a group of 9 men with guns who came to my place of work. I was living in New Jersey at the time, and some of them were wearing police officer outfits and some of them weren't, but there were 9 of them with guns out. They walked I was sitting in my place, the back door was open, it was May, it was warm. These guys came in, and fortunately I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and so he heard the entire thing. And they had no warrants, and they were making claims that I had threatened Christie's life, which was a complete falsehood. And so this friend of mine was listening to it, and he realized that, they were looking for a reason to kill me, to do something, to say, oh, he resisted and, we had to shoot him. So he said to me, he says, go with them and I'll wherever they're taking you, I'll follow up with it. So I walked outside and I said to them, I said, listen, what you're doing is illegal. I said, you've got to know that. I said, and I will pursue you legally. And so they handcuffed me and dragged me off there were 3 black cars waiting outside, dragged me off into this car and, took me to this place. It was a building. I didn't even know if it was a police station or not. Took me in, handcuffed me to this metal bench, and then were interrogating me, saying that I'd threatened Christie's life and that, they were a special unit from the state police that investigated threats against government officials. And whilst this was going on, I was handcuffed to this bench and they were standing there and my phone rang. And I said, pick up the phone. So on the phone, it was the process server who had actually served Christy, who happened to be a friend of mine. And I said, answer it. So they answered it, and she said, where are you? And I said, I'm handcuffed to a metal bench in a building with 9 men who say that I threatened Christy's life. And they, she said that she had served Christy, but they weren't interested, in the truth. So then they took me from this, this one building to an actual police station, which is in Morristown. And they started putting me through this booking process, taking photographs and, fingerprinting. No, I don't even know fingerprinting me, but taking photographs. And I realized, actually, in this police station, that they wanted to do something really bad to me. And they had me stand against this wall. And, and it was a hot day. And so, I felt a little bit dehydrated. And I said to this woman police officer who was sitting behind this desk, I said, can I have a chair? And I remember it so clearly. She said to me, no, you're in jail. And about a minute later, I collapsed and hit the floor. And when I hit the floor, I could hear them screaming and panicking. And, and they came running over to me, these police officers, and there was some pretty foul language going on between these guys and this woman, and it was just a chaotic scene. And they picked me up, put me in this chair, and they called the ambulance. So about, I don't know how much later it was, but this ambulance, or these paramedics turned up with this stretcher. They put me onto this stretcher, and these police officers initially handcuffed me to the stretcher. And this other guy, I think he must have been the captain there, he was, take those handcuffs off. And he used an expletive when he told them to do so. And so they rushed me to Morristown Memorial Hospital, put me into this bay. And the nurse came in and said to them, are you going to handcuff him? And they said no. And they turned around and walked away. And this nurse was looking at me. She said, what's going on? I said, I don't know. I said, ask them. She says, they've left. So then about 5 minutes later, the process server called me on my phone. And she said, where are you? And I told her, I said, I'm lying in this hospital, in this stretcher in this hospital. And she says, oh, they handcuffed you? And I said, no. She goes, leave. So I sat up and I said to the nurse, I'm leaving. And she just stood there like in a state of shock. She didn't know what was going on. So I stepped off the stretcher and I said, I'll see you later. And I walked out of the hospital. And, when I got out, then my friend came and picked me up. And then the next day, I drafted up a memorialization of these events and submitted it into the case that was pending in Boston. And so that was the first attempt on my life. And then the second it happened this year. It was June the 14th, 2023. That I was, again, my bodily person was illegally seized. They, they took me to the Morristown police station again, but they took me into a secret little entrance. They, put me through this secret entrance, and then they put me into this jail cell, and they said, there's a warrant for your arrest from Mercer County. And I said, for what? And they said, for unpaid taxes. And this was a case that Christie, when I began the litigation in 2016, he had his Attorney General file a false criminal charge against me, a false criminal indictment, saying I hadn't paid taxes, which was completely false. So anyway, this case in Mercer County, this judge who had been appointed by Christie had issued this arrest warrant for me. And so, this arrest warrant from 2016 finds its way to 2023. They then get the US Marshals, this is, back in June of this year, to come up. They shackle me like I'm a mass murderer, put me in the back of this black vehicle, speed down to Trenton at like 100 miles an hour, and then put me into the Mercer County Correctional Center. And, hoping that I'll disappear into this into this system. So again, I'm thinking to myself, okay, they're looking to really eliminate me this time, and so this is June the 14th. Anyway, the morning of June the 15th, and they put me into this cell, and there's like about 75. It's complete. It's like an insane asylum. So they put me into this cell, and the next day, they said to me, "Oh, we need to take you to see a psychiatrist." And I said, "Why? I don't need to see a psychiatrist." So I knew kind of what they were trying to do. Now the thing was, we can't kill him, but now we're going to label him as he's like a nutcase. So I said, I don't need to see a psychiatrist. So then later that day, they said, "Oh, we need to take you to see the nurse, the prison nurse." So they take me up to this area, the clinic. It's on another floor. And we go into this room, and there's about 30 or 40 prisoners in there. And there's this one guy in there, this old guy, he's confused. He throws his paper cup at the prison guard. So then there's, about 15 of these SWAT type guys come charging in, like clear everybody out into this corridor. So in this corridor, I'm standing there. This doctor who's up there, who must have heard about me, opens up the door and he says, "Come in." So I go in, and all I can hear is mayhem outside. And the doctor says to me, he's like, "It's very unusual to have doctors in here." He said, "I think you need to go to mental health to see somebody." And so I said, "Why?" He goes, "You trust me, you do." So I hadn't been allowed to make a phone call from the time that I was seized to this point. So he takes me up to this other guy, mental health, and I walk in, and it's, a quiet, closed room, and he said, "You need to make a phone call." And I said, "I do." So I picked up the phone, and I called my friend, and I said, "Call my lawyer and tell him where I am and what's going on." And then I hung up. So then they take me from there, and they take me up to see this nurse. So they take me into this room with this nurse, and this nurse, I could see that she's really nervous. Like she's really not behaving properly. So I sit down, and she starts talking to me, and she says, "Oh, I need to give you a tablet." And I said, "A tablet of what?" She says, "Librium." And Librium's an antipsychotic. It's used for people with schizophrenia, and it induces massive sedation. And I said, "I'm not schizophrenic, and I don't really need Librium." So she says, "Well, I've been told that you have to take it." So she gave me the tablet, and, she was so nervous. So I put the tablet in my mouth, but I put it under my tongue. And she didn't, she was so nervous she didn't check. So I just took a little swig of water. And then I left. I got up and walked back to my cell. Well, they took me back to my cell. And then as soon as I got into the cell, I went into the toilet and spat it out. And that was about 4 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock. And then at 7 p.m., 7:30 p.m., I was in this open cell with all these other people. And this one guy who I kind of got talking to, he said, "Oh, they're well, actually, I went to use the bathroom. When I was in the bathroom, he called my name. And he's like, they're calling you at the front gate." So I went to the front gate, and this prison guard was there, and he says, "Confirm my name." And he says, "You get out of here, you're going." And he says, "Get your stuff, leave." And so I walked back, and, I walked back to this gate, and he's like, "Go downstairs." And there was this van waiting for me that they just put me onto this prison van in Trenton, this is in Trenton, and drove me into the middle of Trenton and just like kicked me off this bus at like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And then I, made my way back to where I was living. And then, of course, over the next few days, I drafted up a lawsuit against Christie and the police officer.
With the case being filed in the federal court in Newark, and with Mr. Christie having been in and out of the court as the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey from 2000 to 2008, do you believe that he will attempt to exert any influence in the court and that the case will be fairly adjudicated?
My concern about defendant Christie efforts, to interfere in the judicial process have, have been a factor throughout these cases, which is why, over the years, I tried to get cases out of New Jersey. So with this particular case, which is K11-15, which is the case pertaining to the illegal imprisonment that I've just described, when I filed that case, I initially filed it in the federal court in Newark. And over the years, because of the litigation and because of the fact that I've publicized widely Christie's involvements in these cases, the judges in that court became much more cautious about how they were handling my cases. And so the reason I filed it there was because in the law, because these events happened in New Jersey, the law pertaining to jurisdiction and venue, directed that the case should be filed in New Jersey. But when I sent a copy of the complaint to the judge in Florida, she had the authority to ensure that that particular case was filed in the federal court in Miami because I had a case that was pending there, the one I filed prior to that. So my concerns now about Christie's efforts to sabotage my cases, to interfere with judges, I would say haven't completely disappeared, but they are substantially less than they were. And the reason that I think that's the case is because I've publicized so widely his misconduct, and because I've been so, I suppose, relentless in my prosecution of these cases. So I think now, I don't think he's going to even attempt to try and interfere in the judicial process in Miami. I don't think that's going to happen. And one of the reasons being that, his connections with Florida are minimal. Whereas in New Jersey, because he was the U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey, because he was the governor of the state, I suppose it was just inevitable that he had an extensive network of judges and lawyers and people in this area.
Was there something going on in June that you think led to what happened, like legally with your case?
I think that, this arrest warrant that had come from the case in Mercer County, that in conjunction with the relentlessness of my prosecution of cases. So it wasn't just one specific event. It was a culmination of a lot of these events. And, as I said, they hadn't been able to stop me in the courts. So, their attempt, in May 2021 had failed. But they still, it was still, they wanted to get rid of me. And so in June 2023, that this was, I say this, I think their last effort to do that.
Okay. I don't think it's any secret that you and Chris Christie have been at loggerheads for almost a decade, maybe one of the longest running spats in New Jersey history. But the events as you just described of May 27th, 2021 and June 14th, 2023 would, I am sure, make evident to most people that he and his people, whoever they are, want you gone in the most sinister way. So why, after all the threats and deprivations which you endured, have you not gone?
Well, the reason that I haven't gone pertains to the principal reason that I gave earlier as to why I decided to fight, which is for my children. So once I made that decision to embark on this fight, I had a number of conversations with myself, particularly, but with a couple of other people. And, I suppose the conversation with myself was this. I said that once I embark on this fight, that I will not stop till I have won, till I have, had the truth come out, and till I procure justice. And I said to myself, if it takes the rest of my life to do this, then that's the price I'm prepared to pay. That I will not stop. I mean, I won't stop. But if they did something sinister, by trying to kill me to stop me, then obviously that would stop me. But I would not stop until I had achieved the goal that I'd set myself in the beginning.
Do you worry about your children?
There was a point in time where I did have concerns about them, and my ex-wife, who obviously has a very intimate understanding of all of this, took some measures to ensure that that there was, I suppose, that there were extra levels of security around them.
In the cases you are currently prosecuting against Christie, I see that he is accused, and there does appear to be a substantial body of evidence in support of the accusations, that he engaged in longstanding patterns of racketeering. I'm going to read a few excerpts from complaints you filed in the federal courts in Miami and Newark, which are respectively K11-14 and K11-15 of the Kaul cases. And can you explain the allegations and statements in lay terms? K11-14 exposes the grand corruption of the government of the United States of America by multinational publicly traded for-profit corporations and their lethal profit-purposed exploitation of the American public.
Yes, the role of corporations, for-profit corporations in the healthcare sector, and their relationship with certain sectors of the American government is one that I really did not understand until these events happened to me beginning in 2012. And over these years, I came to know through my own research and through conversations with other doctors that what's been going on is this. These for-profit healthcare corporations, these insurance companies, that provide health insurance to people, what they do is they take, for example, $100 from a patient, and they're meant to spend 90 cents or $90 of that $100 on patient care. But what they've been doing is they take the $100, they spend $10 on patient care, and they keep the other $90 for the shareholders and the executives. And in this scheme of theirs, over these years, what they've done is they've co-opted certain sectors and persons within state and federal governments to bring criminal charges against doctors to whom they owe money. And they've been targeting principally ethnic minority physicians. And what they do is they file false indictments against these physicians, and they have them sent to jail for 10 to 20 years. And they seize all of their assets, their houses, their businesses, their cars, bank accounts, and then they don't have to pay them the money that they owe them. And so my cases, obviously, they pertain to the things that happened to me, and it's me seeking justice. But over the years that this has been going on, and the more connections I've made with doctors around the country, the case has become really about correcting systemic problems that have affected many doctors. And so my litigation and my case is the platform on which those reformations are going to come about. And I've had conversations with various people over the years who were not involved in medicine, and they have had no idea that this war on doctors has been perpetrated by the insurance industry. So over the years that I've been involved in prosecuting these cases, and with all the doctors around the country who've reached out to me and become connected with me, I came to fully understand what was going on and with the corporations and the government. And so my case and my cases provide this legal platform on which to bring about these changes to this system, so that, you know, doctors are not continually being indicted and sent to jail by insurance corporations looking to not pay them and to maximize their corporate profits.
Chris Christie, as I'm sure you know, is attempting to secure the Republican nomination for the 2024 U.S. presidential elections. And it appears that the central part of his campaign is to attack Donald Trump's character. What's your opinion of Christie's political strategy?
I have a pretty clear opinion as to not just his political strategies, but his, you know, overall strategies kind of in life. And I think Chris Christie is an individual that has, in my opinion anyway, built his political career on malfeasance, you know, from when he was, you know, operating in Morris County as a freeholder, through his time as the U.S. Attorney, where he used the office of the U.S. Attorney to go after his political opponents, one being Charles Kushner, who was Jared Kushner's father. I mean, Charles Kushner was giving money to the Democratic Party. So Christie used that power to go after Charles Kushner. And then when he was the governor, he used the governor's office in New Jersey to build or to collect money, which he did through shakedowns and the rest of it. I mean, pure mafia stuff, to get money to become the president of America. And, you know, he began that journey way before, but he, you know, attempted to become the president in 2016, and, you know, Donald Trump won. And it's important for people to recognize that, you know, Trump and Christie were, I suppose, were allies. You know, at one point in time, you know, Christie was going to become the vice president. And when all of that was going on, you know, I was very much involved kind of in that back and forth. And so now with Christie, you know, going after Donald Trump and attacking him, you know, to try and bolster his own political position, I really think it's an unwise strategy, because nobody really takes Christie seriously. They say, how can a man who shut down a bridge because because a mayor of Fort Lee did not endorse him, how can a man like that have any moral authority to criticize anybody else? And so, as far as it being a strategy, I think it's a flawed strategy, because I think that, generally speaking, you know, in politics, even though politicians are a dishonest bunch, I think authenticity is really important. And I think somebody, you know, like the Kennedy individual, Robert Kennedy, I think to me embodies that. Christie does not. So if I was his political strategist, I would say, stay away from talking about Donald Trump.
I must admit that within the Kaul cases, there was one by which I was particularly intrigued, K11-5, which is a case you're prosecuting in India. How and why did K11-15 come into existence?
That case came into existence because I was not making headway in the American court system at that time. And so I'm a citizen of India, and Allstate Insurance Company does business in India. And I realized that if I couldn't make headway in an American court, that I would have a much greater chance of making it in an Indian court. And so I have family in India who are involved in the legal profession. And it wasn't difficult for me to find a lawyer in India to bring that case, K11-5. And in that case, Christie's a defendant, Allstate Insurance Company is a defendant, and the state of New Jersey is a defendant in that case. And the thrust of that case pertains to the policies of racial discrimination that Allstate, for one, was conducting here in America against Indian doctors.
Although the Kaul cases began with your very unique story, the issues upon which they were and indeed are based are the issues on which the lives of many other physicians have been destroyed. It seems apparent from your legal and public relations work that you have taken a lead role in the cause to expose the insurance industry and government's schemes against Indian physicians. First of all, do you agree with this characterization? And secondly, and finally, what role do you see this interview playing in the overall strategy of yourself and other Indian physicians in your fight against discrimination?
Well, I do agree with the characterization. And in understanding my role in this fight, I also understand that I was the first doctor to have, I suppose, the courage and the determination to go after these people, because prior to that, every other doctor who had been attacked, they just didn't fight back. They just, whatever happened to them, however unjust, they just accepted it. And I was just, absolutely determined that I was not going to put up with this, and that I was going to rectify the situation in the beginning for myself. And then as the case progressed and these other doctors came to me, I realized that my fight was for a much greater cause than mine. And that's exactly what's happened, is all these other doctors have rallied behind me. And this particular interview, and this is the beginning of this documentary, one of the reasons I wanted to do it was to set a starting point, because I'm looking forward in terms of what I'm going to be doing with my life, where I'm going to be going. The litigation is one part of it, but there's a lot more work that I have, that I had started in 2012, that pertains to charities that I had set up with the Spine Africa project, where I was going out to Africa and operating and treating people in various parts of Africa. There was the educational programs I had commenced. And so I wanted to have this piece be, in a way, a sort of a point, like a defining point, so to speak, where it's a point that not draws a line, but makes a mark between all of the things that had happened before, that it was necessary for them to happen for me to be where I am now. But where I am now is a great place. And so, where I'm going to be in the future with the work I'm going to be doing, this is really what I'm looking towards. And so having something such as this be a reference point, that as I'm going forward, I'll be able to look back, and people will be able to look back to follow the story from this point going forwards. So in the times that I've thought about the work I'm going to be doing going forward, I mentioned the charity that I'd set up in 2008, the Spine Africa project, where we had started working at a hospital in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in the Eastern Congo. And so within that charity, which is a 501c3 charity, I had set up a program called the Invictus Initiative, and it's named after a poem that was written actually Invictus by its English poet William Ernest Henley. He wrote it in the 1800s, and it's a poem about fortitude and resilience and overcoming adversity, because he wrote that poem when he was 17 and he just had his leg chopped off. He was lying in a bed in a hospital in London. And the poem was taken on by Nelson Mandela, and he had the words written on his prison cell in Robben Island. And so the Invictus Initiative is a program where I'm going to be going into men's jails and talking to men about my journey and about how on my journey I was presented with many, many adversities, and that I was always able, by taking a particular perspective on challenges, to turn them into what I refer to as my advantages or my obstacles into my opportunities. And so that in my life, all these things that happened to me, they became my stepping stones. They never became the stones around my neck. And so I've always had, for a number of reasons, a great sense of compassion with men who are in jail, with people, for whom life hasn't been particularly kind. And so a large part of my work, which is very meaningful to me, is going to be talking in men's jails. And I have done some of that over the last 10 years in men's jails and in juvenile detention centres. So that's going to occupy, in the beginning, I would say a good percentage of my time. Yeah. With the Invictus Initiative and in talking to these men, I want to give them, or I want to communicate to them, not give them, I want to communicate to them and show them that when things happen in life, if you take a particular perspective and you ask yourself the question of, what's the lesson for me? What's the gift that's coming to me in this seemingly tragic situation? And if you ask yourself that question and you look for that gift and you look for that lesson, then that terrible experience becomes something good. And so for these men in jail, when they come out of jail, I would hope that their life takes a course, in a direction where they don't have to experience that kind of hardship again.